The most powerful man in Chicago smiled the moment I embarrassed him. That was the first sign that something was very wrong. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than my annual salary. Politicians, investors, celebrities, and philanthropists filled the room in expensive suits and designer gowns. Everyone seemed perfectly comfortable pretending they belonged there. I did not. I stood near the back beside a display promoting the community literacy program I had spent 3 years building. My name was on the presentation board. My work was being honored that night. Yet somehow I felt less important than the flower arrangements. "Relax," my friend Sarah whispered. "You look like you are preparing for a tax audit." "I would rather attend a tax audit." She laughed. I did not. Public events were not my thing. Public attention was even worse. Unfortunately, both arrived at exactly 7:43 in the evening. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and began thanking sponsors. Applause echoed through the ballroom. More speeches followed. More applause. Then one name changed the atmosphere completely. Vincent Moretti. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even the people pretending not to care suddenly cared very much. I had heard the name for years. Everybody had. He owned companies, properties, charities, and enough influence to make newspaper editors nervous. Rumors followed him everywhere. Some people admired him. Others feared him. I belonged firmly in the second group. Vincent stood from a front row table. Tall. Calm. Impeccably dressed in a dark suit. The room seemed to shift around him. Not because he demanded attention. Because he never needed to. After accepting recognition for a major donation, he delivered a brief speech. Professional. Respectful. Surprisingly thoughtful. Then something unexpected happened. His gaze moved across the ballroom. Directly toward me. I immediately looked behind myself. Nobody. Just me. My stomach tightened. Vincent smiled slightly. Then he addressed the crowd again. "Before I return to my seat, there is someone else who deserves recognition tonight. Every eye in." The room followed his gaze. Mine included. Emily Carter. My heart nearly stopped. Sarah grabbed my arm. Oh my God. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Instead, a spotlight found me. Hundreds of people turned in my direction. Vincent continued speaking. "The literacy program she created has helped hundreds of children and families across this city." Applause erupted around me. I forced a polite smile. Surely that was the end of it. It was not. Vincent stepped away from the podium. "Emily," he said, "would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tomorrow evening?" Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that arrives only when nobody expects what they just heard. My brain stopped functioning for approximately 3 seconds. Every person in the ballroom stared at me. Waiting. Watching. Judging. I could have said yes. It would have been easier. Polite. Predictable. Instead, I heard my own voice before I fully processed the decision. "No," the word echoed through the room. A glass dropped somewhere near the back. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Sarah looked seconds away from cardiac arrest. The entire ballroom froze. Yet Vincent Moretti did not. He simply studied me for a moment. Then, to my complete confusion, he smiled. Not an angry smile. Not a forced smile. A genuine one. "Fair enough," he said calmly. And somehow that response frightened me far more than if he had been offended. Everyone expected a disaster. By the next morning, half the city seemed convinced I had destroyed my future. My phone started ringing before 7 o'clock. Messages flooded my inbox. Friends, colleagues, people I barely knew. Every conversation began the same way. "What were you thinking?" I was asking myself the exact same question. The gala footage spread quickly online. Someone had recorded the entire exchange. The moment Vincent Moretti invited me to dinner. The moment I rejected him. The moment the room froze. By noon, local blogs had already turned the story into entertainment. Some called me brave. Others called me foolish. A few suggested I should immediately move to another state. Sarah arrived at my office carrying coffee and enough anxiety for both of us. "Have you heard from him?" she asked. "No." That is somehow more terrifying. I hated admitting it, but she had a point. The silence bothered me. Powerful men were not famous for accepting rejection gracefully. Yet 24 hours had passed without consequences. No angry phone calls. No threats. No attempts to embarrass me publicly. Nothing. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me nervous. 3 days later, I finally encountered Vincent again. Not at a gala. Not at a luxury event. At a community center on the south side of Chicago. I had spent the morning preparing materials for a literacy program when I noticed unusual activity outside. Black sport utility vehicles lined the curb. Security personnel stood near the entrance. My stomach immediately sank. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered. Sarah looked through the window. Well, what? At least you will not need to wonder where he is." The front doors opened. Vincent entered carrying a folder. No dramatic entrance. No entourage following him into the building. Just calm confidence and that same infuriating composure. Several volunteers recognized him immediately. Whispers spread through the room. Vincent greeted staff members politely before walking toward the director's office. I watched from across the hallway. He did not even glance in my direction. For reasons I could not explain, that annoyed me more than if he had. 20 minutes later, the center director called everyone into the main room. Volunteers gathered around folding tables. Vincent stood near the front beside a presentation screen. The director smiled broadly. "We have exciting news." My instincts immediately disagreed. The director continued. "A new donor has agreed to fully fund our literacy expansion project for the next 5 years." Applause erupted. I remained suspicious. Then the next sentence arrived. "Mr. Moretti has also committed funding for 2 additional community centers." The room exploded with excitement. Volunteers hugged each other. Staff members looked close to tears. I stood frozen. Vincent accepted their gratitude with visible discomfort, as though he would rather be somewhere else entirely. After the meeting ended, I finally approached him. "You planned this?" He looked down at me calmly. "Planned what?" "Showing up here right after everything that happened." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Emily, I agreed to fund this project 6 months ago." That answer stopped me cold. 6 months? Yes. Before the gala? Long before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent adjusted the folder beneath his arm. "Not everything is about you." The words should have irritated me. Instead, they almost sounded playful. Before I could respond, he nodded politely and started toward the exit. Halfway across the room, he paused. Without turning around, he said something that stayed with me for the rest of the day. "For what it is worth, Emily, I am glad you were honest." Then he walked away. And somehow, that response unsettled me more than any act of revenge ever could. The strange thing about Vincent Moretti was that every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. For the next several weeks, I tried to focus on work. The literacy program was expanding faster than ever. New volunteers arrived. New partnerships formed. Donations increased. Children filled classrooms that had once sat half empty. Everything should have felt simple. Instead, Vincent's presence seemed to appear everywhere. Not physically. Not always. But somehow every successful project carried his fingerprints. One afternoon, I visited a newly renovated reading center on the west side. The building looked incredible. Fresh paint. Modern computers. Comfortable furniture. Families crowded every room. A small plaque near the entrance listed the organizations responsible for funding the renovation. Vincent's Foundation appeared at the top of the list. 3 days later, I attended a city education meeting. The scholarship program receiving praise had also received support from one of his companies. A week after that, I learned he had quietly funded transportation services that helped children reach after-school programs across the city. It was becoming impossible to avoid the pattern. "You are doing it again," Sarah said one afternoon. "Doing what?" "Thinking about him." I sighed. "I am not thinking about him. You literally just spent 5 minutes staring at a newspaper article with his photograph on it." Unfortunately, she was correct. I folded the newspaper and pushed it aside. "I am trying to understand him." Sarah smiled. "Good luck." The problem was that nothing fit together. The public image, the rumors, the reality, none of it matched. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, I accidentally discovered something even stranger. I was leaving a community board meeting when I noticed a familiar black vehicle parked across the street. Normally I would have ignored it, but a small group of people standing nearby caught my attention. An elderly woman stepped out of a modest apartment building carrying a grocery bag. Vincent was there. Not in a suit this time, just a dark jacket and simple clothes. No cameras. No reporters. No public event. He helped carry her groceries inside. Then he spent several minutes speaking with residents gathered near the entrance. Children ran up to him without hesitation. One little boy handed him a drawing. Vincent accepted it like it was the most important gift he had ever received. I stood beneath my umbrella watching from half a block away. Confused. Fascinated. Completely unable to connect this version of the man with the stories people told about him. The following morning I found myself doing something I never expected. Research. Not internet gossip. Real research. Old newspaper articles. Archived interviews. Community reports. The deeper I looked, the more surprised I became. There were stories about affordable housing projects, scholarship funds, youth programs, neighborhood redevelopment. Again and again his name appeared, usually hidden in the background, rarely seeking credit. Late that evening, exhausted from reading, I closed my laptop and stared out my apartment window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Across the city, thousands of lights shimmered in the darkness. My phone vibrated. A new message appeared from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Curiosity can be dangerous, Emily. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. A second message arrived moments later. Fortunately, it can also be useful. I stared at the screen in disbelief, because somehow, without signing his name, I knew exactly who had sent it. The most frustrating conversations are the ones that never actually happen. I stared at the messages on my phone for nearly 10 minutes. Curiosity can be dangerous, Emily. Fortunately, it can also be useful. The calm confidence behind those words irritated me immediately. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Finally, I settled on something simple. Are you always this dramatic? The reply arrived less than 30 seconds later. Only when necessary. I rolled my eyes. Then another message appeared. You have been researching me. That is usually my job. I should not have smiled. The fact that I did annoyed me almost as much as the message itself. The next morning, I arrived at the community center determined to focus on work. Unfortunately, life had other plans. A city redevelopment proposal had suddenly become the main topic of conversation. Several neighborhoods were being considered for major construction projects. New luxury apartments. New retail spaces. New investors. Everyone else seemed excited. I was not. I had seen what happened when developers discovered a neighborhood with potential. Small businesses disappeared. Families were priced out. Communities that took decades to build vanished within months. Around noon, our director called an emergency meeting. Volunteers gathered around the conference table, while documents were distributed. The atmosphere felt uneasy. The city is reviewing redevelopment offers, the director explained. One proposal would affect several of our partner neighborhoods. My stomach tightened. The maps confirmed my fears. Several literacy centers would be impacted, including 2 that served hundreds of children every week. Can they actually do this? Someone asked. If the proposal is approved, yes. The room fell silent. Later that afternoon, I attended a public planning session downtown. Business leaders, city officials, and community representatives filled the auditorium. Near the front sat a familiar figure in a dark suit. Vincent Moretti. Of course he was there. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded once. I did not return the gesture. The presentations began. Charts. Projections. Economic forecasts. Then the lead developer took the stage. His vision sounded impressive on paper. Modern buildings. Increased revenue. Urban growth. Yet every benefit seemed to come at someone else's expense. When questions opened, I raised my hand. What protections exist for the families already living in those neighborhoods? The developer smiled politely. Relocation assistance programs will be available. That was not my question. The room became noticeably quieter. What protections exist for the people who want to stay? The developer's smile weakened. Several officials exchanged glances. I continued. What happens to the small businesses? The community centers? The local programs? No immediate answer came. Then another voice entered the conversation. She is asking the correct question. Every head turned. Vincent stood slowly from his seat. Calm. Composed. Impossible to ignore. Growth is important, he said. But communities are not numbers on a spreadsheet. The developer looked uncomfortable. Vincent continued. Any proposal that ignores the people already living there is incomplete. A murmur spread across the auditorium. For the next 20 minutes, the discussion shifted dramatically. Questions became harder. Assumptions faced challenges. By the time the meeting ended, the proposal review had been delayed pending further evaluation. Outside the building, evening sunlight reflected against glass towers. I was halfway down the steps when Vincent appeared beside me. You look surprised in there, he said. I was. Because I agreed with you? Because you did not have to. Vincent slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Emily, you keep assuming we are standing on opposite sides. I looked at him carefully. Are we not? For a moment he studied the city beyond us. Then his gaze returned to mine. That depends, he said quietly. Have you considered the possibility that we have been fighting for the same thing all along? Some truths arrive quietly. No dramatic music. No lightning. Just a single sentence that refuses to leave your mind. Have you considered the possibility that we have been fighting for the same thing all along? For the next several days, Vincent's question followed me everywhere. While reviewing grant applications, while meeting with volunteers, while organizing book drives, every time I encountered a problem affecting the community, I found myself wondering what Vincent would say about it. The realization was deeply annoying. Sarah noticed immediately. You are doing that thing again. What thing? Pretending you are not thinking about him. I closed the folder in front of me. I am thinking about redevelopment proposals. Sure. And funding issues. Absolutely. And community programs. Sarah smiled. Of course. I pointed a pen at her. You are impossible. And you are losing this argument. Unfortunately, she was correct. The following week brought another surprise. The city announced a public review panel to evaluate the redevelopment proposal. Community leaders, business owners, and nonprofit representatives would participate. To my complete shock, I received an invitation. So did Vincent. The first meeting took place inside an old municipal building downtown. Long tables filled the room. Documents covered every surface. The atmosphere felt serious from the moment we arrived. Several developers presented revised plans. Better numbers. Better promises. Better public relations. Yet something still felt missing. During a break, I stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of reports. You look disappointed. I did not need to turn around. You have a habit of appearing unexpectedly. Vincent stood beside a large window overlooking the city. Occupational hazard. Being mysterious is not an occupation. You would be surprised. Despite myself, I laughed. The sound caught both of us off guard. For a moment, the tension that had defined every previous interaction simply disappeared. Then Vincent handed me a folder. What is this? Read it. Inside were photographs, property records, historical surveys, community impact reports. I frowned. Where did you get these? I commissioned them. Why? Vincent glanced toward the meeting room. Because arguments are more effective when supported by facts. I spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the material. The information was extraordinary. Detailed research proving how similar redevelopment projects had affected neighborhoods across the country. Some outcomes were positive. Others were devastating. Most importantly, the reports offered alternatives.
Solution.
Better approaches. By the time the meeting resumed, I viewed the entire situation differently. Hours later, after the final presentations concluded, several panel members gathered near the exit discussing next steps. One elderly community organizer approached Vincent directly. Thank you, she said. For what? For listening. The woman smiled. Most powerful people prefer talking. Then she walked away. Vincent remained unusually quiet. She is right, you know, I said. About what? You listen more than people realize. Something softened in his expression. That may be the nicest thing you have ever said to me. Do not get used to it. Too late. Evening sunlight filled the hallway. Golden reflections stretched across polished floors. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary day. Inside, something felt different. Not dramatic. Not romantic. Just different. For the first time since I met Vincent Moretti, I stopped seeing the reputation before the person. And that was precisely when things became far more complicated. The past has a strange way of finding you when you finally stop looking for it. I discovered that on a quiet Saturday afternoon, while cleaning storage boxes inside the community center basement. The redevelopment review process had entered another phase, and most of us were buried beneath paperwork. I welcomed the distraction. Thinking about funding proposals was easier than thinking about Vincent Moretti. Unfortunately, life seemed determined to connect those subjects. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight as I sorted old records and donation files. Most of the boxes contained ordinary documents. Attendance reports. Event flyers. Financial statements. Then I found a faded cardboard container tucked behind a metal shelf. The label read, Community Scholarship Archive. Curious, I opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings dating back nearly 20 years. I smiled as I flipped through images of neighborhood events and graduation ceremonies. Then one photograph stopped me completely. My breath caught. The picture showed my father standing beside a much younger Vincent Moretti. I stared at it for several seconds. My father was smiling. Vincent looked no older than his late 20s. They were shaking hands outside a small manufacturing building. Confusion washed over me immediately. My father had passed away 6 years earlier. He had never mentioned knowing Vincent. Not once. I searched the box for more information and found an old newspaper clipping attached to the photograph. The article described a local factory that had nearly closed after severe financial difficulties. According to the story, an anonymous investor stepped in and helped preserve hundreds of jobs. I read the paragraph 3 times before realizing who that investor had been. Vincent. My father had worked at that factory for almost 15 years. If the business had closed, everything in our lives would have changed. I sat motionless on the basement floor. Suddenly dozens of old memories returned. Nights when my parents worried about bills. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Then, almost overnight, things improved. Not dramatically. Just enough. My father kept his job. Our family stayed afloat. I never knew why. Now I did. Later that evening, I could not stop thinking about the discovery. Finally, I did something I rarely did. I called Vincent. The line connected after 2 rings. Emily. Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely familiar. How did you know it was me? You only call when something important happens. I almost laughed. That is probably true. A brief silence followed. Then I asked the question, did you know my father? The silence on the other end became noticeably longer. Yes, Vincent said quietly. I did. My pulse accelerated. Why did nobody tell me? Because your father asked me not to. I closed my eyes. Why? When Vincent finally answered, his voice carried a sincerity I had never heard before. Because he was proud. I sat beside the window watching city lights appear across the evening skyline. You helped save the factory. Many people helped. But you started it. Another pause. Your father was one of the hardest working men I have ever met. Emotion tightened my throat unexpectedly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent said something that changed everything. Emily, your father helped me too. I frowned. What does that mean? His answer came softly. It means the story is not as simple as you think. Some answers change your opinion. Others change your entire understanding of the past. After that phone call, I barely slept. Vincent's final sentence repeated in my mind long after midnight. It means the story is not as simple as you think. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds. I arrived at the community center early, hoping work would distract me. It did not. Every document reminded me of questions I still did not have answers to. Around 10 o'clock my phone vibrated. A single message appeared. Coffee. Noon. There was an address beneath it. No explanation. No signature. Somehow none was necessary. At exactly noon, I found myself standing outside a small neighborhood diner on the north side. It was the kind of place that survived because everyone knew everyone. Nothing about it matched Vincent's reputation. When I entered, he was already there, seated in a corner booth beside the window. No security. No expensive entourage. Just coffee and sunlight filtering through the glass. You chose this place? I asked. Your father liked their pie. That answer immediately silenced me. I slid into the booth across from him. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Vincent folded his hands on the table. Your father met me during one of the worst years of my life. I stared at him. You. A faint smile appeared. Believe it or not, I was not born knowing everything. I almost laughed. Almost. Vincent glanced toward the window before continuing. 20 years ago, I made several very bad business decisions. I was young, impatient, convinced I could solve every problem alone. His voice remained calm, but something deeper existed beneath the words. The factory project nearly failed. If it had, hundreds of people would have lost their jobs, including your father. I listened carefully. What happened? Vincent looked down at his coffee cup. Most people saw numbers. Debt. Risk. Failure. Your father saw people. I frowned. What do you mean? He walked into a meeting he was never supposed to attend and told me something I have never forgotten. Vincent's expression softened slightly. He said that leadership means remembering who pays the price when you are wrong. Silence settled between us. Outside, pedestrians moved along the sidewalk unaware that my entire view of history was shifting. That stayed with you? I asked quietly. Every day. The waitress brought fresh coffee. Neither of us touched it. Vincent continued. The investment worked. The factory survived. But your father never wanted recognition. I looked toward the rain beginning to tap against the window. That sounds like him. Yes. For a moment both of us smiled. Then I asked the question that had been growing in my mind for weeks. Why did you notice me at the gala? Vincent's eyes met mine directly. No hesitation. No performance. Because you reminded me of him. My breath caught. Me. You challenge people when everyone else stays silent. His voice remained steady. You care more about doing what is right than what is comfortable. Suddenly the ballroom, the invitation, the rejection, everything looked different. Not because he had been pursuing a challenge. Not because he enjoyed power. Because he respected something familiar. The realization left me unexpectedly speechless. Vincent leaned back slightly. For the record, Emily, I knew you would say no. I blinked. You did. A genuine smile appeared. Absolutely. Then why ask? He looked at me for several seconds before answering. Because sometimes courage deserves to be seen. The moment someone changes your mind is rarely the moment you notice your heart changing too. For several days after meeting Vincent at the diner, I found myself replaying every conversation we had ever shared. Not because I wanted to, because suddenly they made sense. The confidence, the patience, the strange refusal to become offended. I had spent months waiting for him to prove every rumor true. Instead, he kept becoming more difficult to misunderstand. Autumn arrived quietly across Chicago. Trees shifted into shades of gold and amber. The redevelopment review panel continued meeting every week. Community leaders worked alongside business representatives to create a compromise that protected residents while encouraging responsible growth. For the first time, genuine progress seemed possible. One evening, I attended a large public forum at a downtown convention center. Hundreds of people filled the hall. Residents, journalists, investors, politicians. The atmosphere felt charged long before the event began. Vincent sat several rows ahead of me speaking with city officials. As usual, he appeared completely calm. I envied that about him. The presentations moved smoothly at first. Then the questions began. A businessman standing near the front microphone criticized the entire community review process. According to him, Neighborhood advocates were slowing economic progress. Several audience members applauded. Then his attention shifted toward Vincent. "Some people here want credit for helping communities," he said loudly. "But they only help when it benefits their image." The room immediately became uncomfortable. Everyone understood exactly who he meant. I felt my stomach tighten. Months earlier, I might have silently agreed. Months earlier, I would have assumed the criticism was deserved. But now I knew things nobody else in that room knew. I knew about the factory, my father, the scholarships, the housing projects, the countless acts of generosity that never reached newspapers. Vincent remained seated. He did not defend himself. He did not react at all. The businessman continued speaking. "People like that are the reason nobody trusts powerful men anymore." Something inside me shifted. Before I could reconsider, I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Hundreds of faces turned toward me. The businessman paused. "With respect," I said, "you are criticizing a person you clearly do not know." The room became very quiet. My pulse accelerated. But I kept going. I have spent most of this year questioning Vincent Moretti, challenging him, disagreeing with him. A few people laughed softly. Even Vincent looked surprised. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is that assumptions are easy. The businessman folded his arms. "Are you saying he is perfect?" "No," I shook my head. "I am saying he shows up. He listens. He invests in communities most people overlook. And he does it long before anyone starts paying attention." Silence followed. Then someone applauded. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, applause spread through the hall. Not overwhelming. Not dramatic. Just honest. I finally looked toward Vincent. His expression remained calm, but something warm appeared in his eyes. Gratitude. Respect. Maybe something deeper. After the event ended, people slowly filtered toward the exits. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. City lights glittered across the skyline. Moments later, Vincent joined me on the sidewalk. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he smiled. That was unexpected. I laughed softly. It was unexpected for me too. For several seconds we stood beneath the glow of the streetlights watching traffic move through the city. Then Vincent looked at me and said quietly, "You know, Emily, defending me was never something I wanted from you." I met his gaze. "I know." His smile deepened slightly. "That is why it mattered. Some rooms remember who we used to be." A year later, I found myself standing outside the same ballroom where everything had started. The same crystal chandeliers glowed beyond the glass doors. The same city leaders, donors, and community advocates filled the guest list. Yet almost everything else had changed. The redevelopment agreement had become a national model. Neighborhood businesses remained open. Families stayed in their homes. New investments arrived without erasing the people who already belonged there. The literacy program had expanded into 4 additional communities. For the first time in years, I felt like the future was something we could build instead of something we had to survive. "You are staring at the door again," Sarah said beside me. "I know." "Nervous?" I smiled. "A little." She squeezed my arm. "Good. It means this matters." Inside, conversations filled the ballroom with a soft hum of voices and laughter. I recognized dozens of faces. Some had been present the night I rejected Vincent. Others had joined the story later. As the evening continued, speakers celebrated community achievements and partnerships that had transformed neighborhoods across Chicago. My name appeared more than once. So did Vincent's. Yet neither of us seemed interested in the attention. We had spent the past year working together, arguing occasionally, laughing more often, and building a friendship founded on trust instead of assumptions. Somewhere along the way, that friendship had quietly become something neither of us could ignore. Near the end of the evening, I noticed Vincent standing alone beside the ballroom windows. The city lights reflected across the glass behind him. He looked exactly as confident as the first night I met him, but now I understood the difference between confidence and arrogance. One demanded attention. The other simply existed. He noticed me watching and smiled. The same calm smile that had confused me a year earlier. For a moment, memories returned. The invitation. My rejection. The silence that followed. The entire room frozen in disbelief. I laughed softly to myself. What? Sarah asked. Nothing. But it was not nothing. It was perspective. The master of ceremonies invited several guests to the stage for final recognition. Applause filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Another successful event. Another evening destined for newspaper headlines. Yet the moment that mattered most was happening far away from the microphones. Vincent remained near the windows, speaking with several community leaders. He looked happy, not because of the attention, because of the people, because of the work, because of the lives improved through countless small decisions. Then he glanced toward me again. He did not walk over. He did not make a speech. He did not ask a question. Most importantly, he did not ask for an answer. He simply waited. And suddenly I understood. A year earlier, everyone in this room had expected him to use power. Instead, he used patience. Everyone expected him to demand. Instead, he respected. Everyone expected him to change me. Instead, he gave me the freedom to choose. My heart felt unexpectedly light. Before I could overthink the decision, I started walking. Conversation slowed as people noticed, then stopped completely. One step, then another. Vincent watched me approach with quiet curiosity. No assumptions. No pressure. Just trust. When I finally reached him, I took his hand in mine. The ballroom fell silent once again. But this time nobody was waiting for rejection. Vincent looked down briefly before meeting my eyes. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to, because sometimes the most important answers arrive without a single word. And for the first time in my life, the most powerful man in the room was not the one everyone was watching. It was the one who had learned how to wait.